There are moments in the history of martial arts that are defined by explosive action. The knockout strike that no one saw coming. The impossible, blood-soaked comeback. The blinding blur of a perfectly executed technique that defies the limits of human anatomy. But there are other moments, rarer, infinitely heavier, and far more terrifying moments, that are defined entirely by the absolute absence of action. Moments where time seems to fracture, the air is violently sucked out of the room, and the collective breath of thousands is held hostage by the crushing gravity of a single, unyielding decision. It was November 27th, inside the cavernous, legendary walls of the Nippon Budokan Arena. Over 9,000 dedicated martial artists, grandmasters, and breathless fans had packed the stands to the rafters. They were gathered for a global, cross-discipline exhibition, a solemn and grand memorial meant to celebrate the immortal, world-shifting legacy of Bruce Lee. The atmosphere in the stadium was thick with an almost religious reverence. One by one, masters of Kyokushin karate, Taekwondo, Wing Chun, and Judo had walked to the center of the brightly illuminated mat. One by one, they had knelt. They had bowed deeply, pressing their foreheads to the floor, offering their absolute humility to the massive, imposing portrait of the dragon that hung above a traditional floral shrine, bathed in candlelight and incense. It was a universally understood protocol. It was mandatory. To stand in that arena was to acknowledge the man who had brought Eastern martial arts to the global stage. But then, the stadium announcer called the next name, his voice echoing through the massive speakers. And the figure who stepped out from the tunnel and onto the canvas was not a man at all. He was a child. He was 12 years old, but his physical form utterly defied logic. He was a mountain of dense, scarred flesh and unyielding muscle, a terrifying prodigy weighing nearly 300 pounds who had just obliterated the junior ranks to become an undefeated sumo champion. He wore only his traditional, tightly bound mawashi. His massive bare feet hit the mat with the heavy, rhythmic thud of a falling oak tree. He walked with a chilling, dead-eyed purpose to the exact center of the arena, stopping perfectly squarely in front of the shrine. And then, he did nothing. 10 seconds passed. The massive crowd offered a low, respectful murmur, naturally assuming the giant boy was offering a silent, internal prayer before lowering himself to the mat. 20 seconds passed. The murmur began to mutate, dissolving into a chaotic ripple of confused whispers. A tournament referee, dressed in a pristine white uniform, took a hesitant step forward, gesturing gently but firmly toward the portrait, silently prompting the boy to kneel. The boy did not blink. His eyes, dark, ancient, and completely devoid of emotion, stared dead ahead. He was looking not at the portrait, but entirely through it, as if gazing at a horizon invisible to everyone else in the room. 40 seconds. Disrespect in the traditional, hierarchical martial arts world is a cardinal sin. Disrespecting the spirit of Bruce Lee in front of 9,000 of his fiercest disciples is professional and cultural suicide. Anger began to simmer violently in the front rows. Decorated grandmasters shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their faces flushing with indignation. A lone, furious voice from the upper deck suddenly shattered the quiet, screaming through the cavernous space for the arrogant boy to bow. The boy remained carved from stone, his massive chest slowly rising and falling in perfect, controlled rhythm. 60 seconds. The anger in the arena suddenly and inexplicably mutated into something vastly different, something deeply suffocating. Awe, fear, paralyzing electric tension. 9,000 people, packed shoulder to shoulder, fell completely and terrifyingly silent. The transition was so abrupt it felt violent. You could hear the strained breathing of the furious men in the front row. You could hear the faint, buzzing hum of the massive arena floodlights. You could hear the sickeningly loud ticking of the shot clocks mounted on the walls. 85 seconds. The boy was risking immediate banishment from his sumo stable. He was risking national disgrace, media crucifixion, and the collective wrath of the global martial arts community. Why was he standing there like a statue? Was it blind, youthful arrogance? Was it a sudden, paralyzing wave of stage fright? Or did this 12-year-old giant know something feel something that the other 9,000 seasoned warriors in the room did not comprehend? The clock ticked agonizingly closer to 90 seconds. The atmospheric tension reached a physical breaking point, stretching so thin it felt like the entire stadium was about to shatter like glass. Slowly, deliberately, the muscles in the boy's massive legs began to tense. He prepared to make a single movement that would completely break the silence and shatter the martial arts world. But to understand the terrifying silence of those 90 seconds, and the explosive, paradigm-shifting consequence of the 91st, you must first leave the glowing lights of the Budokan. You must rewind the clock, travel far to the freezing, unforgiving peaks of the Yamagata Mountains, and witness the brutal forging of a monster and the bloody creation of an unbreakable philosophy. Sumo is not a sport. To call it a sport, to place it in the same category as boxing or wrestling, is to fundamentally misunderstand its dark and sacred nature. It is a Shinto ritual disguised as combat. It is an ancient, violent dance with the gods, designed centuries ago to purify the earth, drive away malevolent spirits, and guarantee a bountiful harvest. It is an utterly isolationist world, bound by draconian rules, rigid hierarchies, and traditions that have not shifted a single inch in over 1,000 years. When a boy enters a sumo stable or heya, he effectively dies to the outside world. He loses his name. He loses his family. He becomes property of the clay ring, the dohyo. In this hidden world of weeping giants and broken bones, the 12-year-old boy named Ryu was an absolute, terrifying anomaly. By the time he was 10, he possessed the skeletal density and muscular thickness of a grown lumberjack. But his sheer size was not what made the older wrestlers fear him. It was his eyes and the terrifying absence of ego behind them. Most boys who are sent to the sumo stables are looking for personal glory, or they are forced into it by destitute parents hoping for a better life. Ryu was different. He came down from the mountain villages with a spirit that already felt centuries old. He did not fight to win trophies. He fought as if he was trying to prove to the universe that the ground beneath his feet belonged exclusively to him. His training was not merely physical, it was psychological torture designed to break the human spirit. Long before the sun breached the horizon, in temperatures that froze the sweat to their skin, Ryu and the other apprentices would begin the keiko. For hours, he would stand before the teppo, a massive wooden pillar sunk deep into the earth. Thwack, thwack, thwack. He would strike the wood with his open palms, thousands upon thousands of times, until the skin tore, until the wood was stained with his blood, until his nerve endings went numb and the strikes became nothing but a mechanical extension of his will. He pushed heavy wooden sledges loaded with boulders through knee-deep, freezing mud. He was beaten with bamboo canes when his form faltered. And through it all, Ryu never smiled. He never cried. He never spoke a single unnecessary word. He simply absorbed the pain, internalizing it, packing it down into the dark, dense core of his being. His rise through the junior amateur ranks was not a competition, it was a massacre. He remained undefeated in 60 consecutive bouts. The matches were horrifyingly brief. Sumo is a game of explosive physics, and Ryu had mastered the tachi-ai, the initial violent charge at the referee's fan. When Ryu exploded from his crouch, he didn't just push his opponents, he ran through them with the force of a derailing freight train. Boys older, taller, and more experienced than him were routinely carried out of the ring on stretchers, gasping for air, their ribs bruised, their spirits entirely broken. He didn't use tricks. He didn't use complex throws or evasive maneuvers. He simply moved forward. He was an unstoppable, singular force of kinetic energy. But as Ryu destroyed everything in his path, a philosophical conflict was brewing on the horizon, one that would inevitably drag him from the sacred clay of the sumo ring onto the synthetic canvas of the Budokan. The martial arts world at this time was completely under the hypnotic spell of Bruce Lee's philosophy. Lee had revolutionized combat by tearing down the rigid, ancient traditions of the East. His philosophy of Jeet Kune Do was built on adaptability, speed, and formlessness. Be formless, shapeless, like water, Lee famously said. If you put water into a cup, it becomes the cup. You put water into a bottle and it becomes the bottle. Water can flow or it can crash. Be water, my friend. Bruce Lee hated the classical messes of traditional martial arts, the robotic katas, the blind obedience to ancient masters. He believed in fighting without rules, adapting to the opponent, and flowing around obstacles. This philosophy was beautiful. It was highly effective. And it was the exact, diametric opposite of sumo. Sumo does not want to be water. Sumo wants to be the mountain. Sumo does not flow around the obstacle. Sumo forces the obstacle to break itself against the rocks. While Bruce Lee taught his students to evade, redirect, and strike like lightning, Ryu had been trained to dig his bare feet into the dirt, lower his center of gravity, and refuse to yield a single inch of ground, even if it killed him. Sumo is about absolute immovability. It is about planting your roots so deep into the earth that God himself could not push you backward. When the invitation arrived at Ryu's stable for the undefeated prodigy to represent the ancient sport of sumo at the Bruce Lee Memorial Exhibition, his stablemaster hesitated. Sumo wrestlers rarely participated in cross-discipline spectacles. They belonged to the Shinto gods, not to the commercialized lights of modern arenas. But Ryu's streak was making national headlines. The stablemaster, seeing a rare opportunity to showcase the terrifying power of the old ways to a modern audience, accepted. He gave Ryu one simple instruction. Go to the arena. Show them the weight of the mountain. And when you stand before the portrait of the dragon, bow your head and show respect. Ryu had nodded. But inside his ancient, silent mind, a different logic was already taking root. And so, we return to the cavernous expanse of the Nippon Budokan. The clock has hit 89 seconds. The 9,000 spectators are trapped in a vacuum of suffocating silence. The air is heavy with the threat of violence. The grandmasters are clutching their armrests, their knuckles turning white. The referee is paralyzed, unsure if he should physically force the giant boy to his knees, knowing full well that trying to move a 300-pound sumo prodigy against his will is a physical impossibility. 90 seconds. The silence crests. It is a silence so profound it rings in the ears. At the 91st second, Ryu finally moved. He did not drop to his knees. He did not bow his head. He did not lower his eyes. Instead, Ryu shifted his massive weight to his left leg. Slowly, with an agonizing, terrifying grace that completely defied his massive bulk, he lifted his right leg high into the air. He raised it until his knee was almost touching his shoulder, his massive foot hovering suspended in the air. For a split second, he held it there, balancing his entire 300-pound frame on one leg in a perfect, statue-like display of core strength and supreme balance. And then he drove his foot down into the canvas. Boom! The sound of the Shinto Shiko stomp echoed through the silent arena like a cannon shot. The sheer kinetic force of his foot striking the mat vibrated through the floorboards, traveling up the metal bleachers and rattling the teeth of the spectators in the first 10 rows. Before the crowd could even process the violent sound, Ryu shifted his weight to the right. He hoisted his left leg high into the air, holding it at the apex, his face a mask of absolute, terrifying concentration. Boom! He slammed the left foot down, the second impact echoing even louder than the first. The massive portrait of Bruce Lee above the shrine actually trembled slightly from the shockwave traveling through the stage rigging. Ryu squared his shoulders. He lowered his center of gravity, crouching down into the traditional Sankyo position, keeping his back perfectly straight, his eyes locked dead onto the eyes of Bruce Lee in the portrait. He clapped his massive, calloused hands together. Smack! Smack! The sharp sound cut through the lingering echoes of his stomps. He extended his arms outward, palms up, showing that he carried no concealed weapons, offering nothing but his empty, lethal hands. He held the crouch for 3 seconds. Then he stood up, turned his back on the shrine, and began to walk out of the arena. For 10 seconds after Ryu turned his back, the stadium remained dead silent. The 9,000 people were utterly paralyzed, their brains desperately trying to process what they had just witnessed. They had expected submission. They had demanded a bow. And slowly realization began to dawn on the oldest, wisest men in the room. The grandmasters in the front row, the men who had initially been flushed with furious anger, suddenly saw their expressions soften. Their eyes widened in profound realization. One old karate master slowly stood up, placing a trembling hand over his heart. Ryu had not disrespected Bruce Lee. He had done something infinitely more profound. To a sumo wrestler, bowing is a sign of submission. It is an admission of defeat. To drop to the floor is to lose the match. Ryu could not bow, because to bow would be to offer a defeated, submissive spirit to a man who championed ultimate strength and self-actualization. Instead, Ryu had offered Bruce Lee the highest, most sacred honor that exists in the ancient Japanese world. He had performed the shiko, the god-stomping ritual. He had purified the arena for Lee's spirit. By clapping his hands and stomping the earth, Ryu was not treating Bruce Lee as a superior master to grovel before he was treating the spirit of Bruce Lee as a Shinto deity, a warrior god of equal standing. He was offering the dragon the absolute, unbroken strength of the mountain. He was saying, in the only language his brutal life had ever taught him, "I see your infinite water, and I offer you my immovable stone." The lone karate master in the front row began to clap. It was a slow, rhythmic applause. Then the judo masters stood up. They began to clap. The taekwondo grandmasters rose to their feet. The applause spread like wildfire, moving from the floor to the lower bowls, sweeping up the bleachers until all 9,000 people were on their feet. The silence that had suffocated the Budokan was instantly obliterated by a deafening, thunderous roar of absolute respect. They were cheering for the dragon on the wall, and they were cheering for the boy walking back down the tunnel, the mountain who refused to be water, the 12-year-old giant who stared down an entire world of masters and taught them the true, ancient meaning of honor.